There is no doubt the hottest trend in kidlit belongs to graphic novels. That is, if you talk to actual kids, or authors and illustrators, or the publishing companies. But if you're a parent, teacher, librarian, or administrator, you might be worried that while kids clearly love graphic novels, they aren't real reading. If you're feeling resistant to the story format or worried that by letting your kid devour one graphic novel after another without laying eyes on a single traditional chapter book, then this video is for you. Today, author and illustrator Jarrett Lerner and I are going to have a conversation about the wealth of value graphic novels provide and hopefully convince you to look at this genre with fresh eyes. At the end of the conversation, I'll provide some additional quotes and statistics from educators and researchers to back up all we have to say. But for now, let's begin making the case for graphic novels. All right. Hi, I'm Amanda Zieba, and I'm here today with Jarrett Lerner, and we are going to talk about why we love graphic novels and why we think you should let your kids read as many of them as they can get their hands on. And before we get into our conversation, I just want to let you know, I know some of you have watched my videos before, and you might know a little bit about me as a word nerd and an educator. But for this video specifically, I want to tell you I was a middle school educator for 12 years. I have a master's degree in education and a specific reading specialized degree for the state of Wisconsin. And I also have some mom experience of an 8 and 11-year-old reader. And I tell you all this not to like brag or sound high and mighty and stuff, but I just want you to know that I have some good experience with which to share this knowledge. And I'm not just some random girl spouting her opinion on the internet. And just like we teach our kids and our students that they need to check for credibility behind the facts that they're reading and they're listening to on the internet, I just want you to know that this information is good and has been vetted and researched and coming to you from a good place. So that's me. Jarrett, why don't you tell us why you feel like you're a good ambassador for shouting out the goodness of graphic novels?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, first of all. And I think I'm a good ambassador for a number of reasons. One is that I became a reader in large part because of comics and graphic novels before they were really called graphic novels, but comics and comic books were huge for me as a kid, helping turn me into a reader. And now they helped turn me into a writer, into a creator. They helped me feel like I had a voice and I had things to say. They helped me share my stories, and they have been a passion of mine since I was a kid. And now, as an adult, I'm still reading them constantly and loving them, and benefiting from all that they have to offer. And I create them as well. And then in my work as an author and illustrator who works with kids a lot, in person and virtually, multiple times a week, sometimes dozens of times a week, I'm working directly with kids. And I just see what the use of graphic novels and the respecting of them when you're working with kids and making the most of what they have to offer, what it can do for kids to turn them into readers, to make them feel more confident readers, and to turn them into just more confident kids who feel like the things that they love, the things they have to share are worthwhile and ought to be shared.
Yeah, absolutely. That they that their preferences have value. That's so important.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
okay.
I was going to say, and also I think it's their preferences, and also a big argument I make is that, and we can get more into this in depth, but that graphic novels and heavily illustrated stories speak to different kinds of readers. Some people are, I think, more people than we acknowledge and that we allow in the traditional educational structures and the traditional educational curriculums. More people, more kids are visual learners and thrive off of visual information. So by acknowledging that a book full of pictures can be useful for older kids, and for different kinds of kids, it's sort of saying the way your brain works is okay, and we
Yeah.
can make, we can work with that instead of trying to force your brain to think in this one way about books and stories and information. We can acknowledge that your brain's right too. That's fine, and it's working with that instead of trying to shape a kid into a different into something that they're not.
Yeah, and like we're so focused right now as a world and a society as on diversity, right? And like inclusion of all different kinds of experiences and lifestyles and everything. And it's really interesting to think like as an educator, as a parent, as a creator, that like creating diverse experiences or experiencing art and stories in different way, like that's a kind of diversity that we should think about too.
Yeah, learning diversity, and anything that can take into consideration um, that kids are individuals and that every kid is different. I feel like there's a constant battle going on in education between treating each kid the same and trying to change that and acknowledge that every kid isn't the same. And I think the more we tilt towards being able to include the idea and work from a place of every kid being individual, their own individual, I think the better the outcomes. And I know it's tough, and that's a whole different conversation, but the more we can shift away from trying to make every kid fit into a certain mold, giving them molds, the same standardized tests, the same program of study, the more we can get away from that, the better. And I think this is just one other avenue.
Yeah, and it's an avenue that's so readily available right now, which is amazing. Part of my motivation for creating this video and for talking with you about this is I was that mom who in the bookstore, would say, okay, you can pick one graphic novel, but then please also pick one traditional chapter book, or you can read one graphic novel and then we're going to read a chapter book and then you can go back to a graphic novel. I was nervous that if I let my kid only read graphic novels, that I would be doing a disservice to them, or that I would be holding them back. Not that I didn't think they were fun and that my kids liked them. I just was nervous to let them solely read graphic novels. So part of this is trying to rectify my own, mindset. I've since shifted, but if you were to, wander upon old me and my sons in the bookstore and listening to us have that conversation, what would you say to me to convince me like it's okay if he only ever reads graphic novels?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of things to address in there. I think there is a cultural sort of bias against comics and misunderstanding of what comics are and can be. I think for decades now, for nearly a century, I think the broad popular culture and popular consensus has been that comics are a diversion, that they're sort of like silly entertainment, and that's all they really have to offer. And I think that's sort of seeped into parents, a lot of parents and a lot of adults, seeing them when it comes to books, comics and books, seeing them as a sort of candy, whereas text-based books are sort of like the veggies and fruit, the healthy stuff. So I think there's that just like overarching cultural bias that we've been dealing with for decades against comics and what they are. And then I think there's also, I would say, two misunderstandings. The first is about what graphic novels are today, and the plethora of them, and the diversity of them, and the variety, and the richness and quality of them, and the quantity and quality of them. And then about the other misunderstanding is how your kid is interacting with them. So the quality of graphic novels for kids, especially coming out today, is just unparalleled. It's a golden age of quality and quantity too, but also quality. There's just so much good stuff, fiction, nonfiction. It's incredible. Some of the smartest, most talented creators are making these books for kids. And the other thing, I think more importantly, is to think about the kid and how the kid is interacting. I think we often view it as like TV in book form, like Saturday morning comics in book form, when that is not true. Graphic novels that are thoughtfully and carefully arranged are often stimulating kids more certain types of kids more than text based storytelling only. If their brain thrives off visual information. For me, that's how my brain works. And when I look at a page of a graphic novel, I am more stimulated intellectually, emotionally, psychologically. I am more stimulated than when I look at just a page of a book with just words, with just ink and language on it, because my brain responds to that visual information, the color choices, the postures of the characters, the angles of the shots that are in each panel. That information is coming at me in addition to all the words.
Yeah,
So
even like
yeah,
even the font choice.
yeah,
Um because like when I listen to my boys read graphic novels out loud to each other, their voices change. Like they'll go from shouting or screeching or whispering or and if it were just regular text on a page, it might not be as easy for them to imply that or to feel that change for the characters, and then to translate it into their reading experience. And so even something that seems as simple as the actual words on the page, the graphic novel gives them an entire new layer of complexity to the story, which is, it's just so fun to watch them.
yeah. And it's not, and like I said, that's exactly right. And you have to, I think you have to keep in mind that like we said at the outset, that every kid is different. So some kids are going to be more stimulated from just text,
Mm-hmm.
and some kids are going to want to go back and forth. But for some kids, a graphic novel is going to be, exponentially more engaging and, rewarding and rich of an experience. And so they are engaging with the book so much more and so much more thoroughly and meaningfully and productively than they might otherwise. And it's just having that there is reaching more kids, and it's getting more kids addicted to books. And I just think that experience, if the goal is to, and I'm not saying that this should be the goal, but if the goal is to get kids comfortable reading, just plain text in a book, which is something that I think is beneficial and a rewarding experience on its own that kids should have. But to allow them to figure out while reading a graphic novel, hey, a book can do this, they're going to be that much more curious or receptive to the idea of trying a book that doesn't have panels and isn't a graphic novel or isn't heavily illustrated. It's showing them that it's showing them what they can get from a book. And they're going to be that much more curious and open to the idea of seeing what other kinds of books can offer them.
Yeah, I just thought of this while you were talking. And my boys will reread their graphic novels several times. Like they have a
Sure,
tally of how many times they've read each of the Dog Man books.
sure.
And I know that as a teacher, I really struggle to get kids to read things multiple times. Like readers theaters were one way that I kind of tricked them into like rehearsing a text multiple times. But like if you give a student, a short story or a paragraph and say, I want you to read this, 6 times, they're like, why? I already got but when they reread their graphic novels, they pick something up different every time, and they're making connections and they're looking at different pieces of it. And so because they love it so much, they're engaging in that rereading and getting the deeper meaning and seeing the connections and the themes between the books. And that's a benefit that I don't think is outright and obvious for everyone to see
Yeah.
when they look at it.
Yeah. And there are those kids, so I was the second kind. I was the kid who would have happily reread the graphic novels, and then more eagerly reread the graphic novels all those times if I had been asked to. But then, because they excited me so much about storytelling, about reading, about writing, about making my own work, my love of books sort of bled outward. And by the time I was in middle school, I was the kid who, if you had said, all right, read this paragraph, read this chapter, this short story, that's just text, read it over and over and over again and pick it apart and analyze it. I was there. I was ready to do it, because the graphic novels, the comics had created that love, and it sort of had bled out away from graphic novels. I just needed that time and that being allowed to experience that, and to come at books and storytelling and language and find my love of it through what was then a more non-traditional avenue. And then, a couple of years later, I was that kid who would reread a book to sort of analyze the text and break it apart and think about sentences instead of panels.
Yeah. When you had said before, it's so confidence boosting, right? To like be able to hold this stack of books and be like, I read these, I did this, and I did it by myself. And I think too, like the scope of the influence, we are like all sports all time at my house. Like my husband is a college baseball coach. We spray paint a football field on our backyard. They got a field goal post for Christmas. They're very excited.
Wow.
And so like their ultimate dream is to be in the NFL, right? But just below that, their next career choice is to be a graphic novel author artist. Like, and I don't think that would have happened if they didn't really and truly enjoy this reading experience so much, and if I didn't allow them to to devour them without making them feel guilty about it. So it's very cool to see it to spread that far.
Yeah, and by when the adults, whether it's parents or teachers or librarians, acknowledge the value in the thing that they love, that gives them the confidence to say that. Not so long ago, if kids said, I want to be a cartoonist when I grow up, it wasn't. I think that was something that was more hidden and uncool and shied away from. And the fact that it is now on par with being an NFL player, it's like my plan B is to be a cartoonist. I think if you ask most cartoonists of my age or up, they were almost ashamed. I mean they were proud of the stuff they loved, but they weren't going to openly be like, I want to be a graphic novelist. It wasn't that mainstream acceptable cool thing. But by you just saying, I know these have value and I love that you love them, and I'm going to let you explore them and use them, that's huge. And I just can't see and anyone who is resistant to them or against them, if they just even just dip their toes into what's out there and just experience, like you have, what it can do for a kid, I don't see how they can oppose them. And it breaks my heart, because every time I post about graphic novels or I make art in support of them and comics in support of them, every time I hear stories about parents and teachers and administrators or other people who are, putting up walls to prevent them from being used. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, personally, when I read a graphic novel, I feel like it's a lot of work. Like my brain has been trained to do text-only stories. And so I know that it is not my go-to format of a story. But that doesn't mean that just because it's not my preferred reading method, I shouldn't allow my kids to have that preferred reading method. And I think that's, just because you let your kids love graphic novels, it doesn't mean that you also have to be a lover of graphic novels.
Sure.
So that's, I don't know, something to take into account for too. I think our generation of brains we're just raised differently, and we're not used to like keeping track of all the stimuli that you were talking about. Like I said, for me, it feels like, gosh, this is a lot of work.
Yeah.
But for them, they enjoy that stimulation. So back to the diversity of readers that we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm. And the diversity of just brains. I think when you talk about how a kid's brain and imagination works, sometimes that I hope that can be a little bit more helpful, because we all know that we think differently, we learn differently, but when you're taking the kids brain into consideration, I hope that makes people be like, oh yeah, they do, obviously they think and interact with the world a little bit differently, and this is just something that they are more in tune to and in tune with.
Yeah. When I told my sons that I was going to be interviewing you about this, they quickly rambled off their favorite graphic novels, and my son even made a video of all of his favorites, and I can put that in the description box for people who want some suggestions. But if you had to pick three of your favorites to recommend for people who hadn't maybe experienced graphic novels before, or they're looking for one to give a try, what would be three of your favorites that you would recommend?
So, man, it's tough. It's tough because I'm constantly, now I'm looking at my shelves. I constantly am reading everything, graphic novels and everything else. But I did grab some before we sat down to talk. I grabbed a few off my shelf and that are just like constant favorites of mine for a variety of reasons. So one series that I love is the Mr. Wolf's Class series by Aaron Nels Steinke. And these are just fabulous. These are just, it's a teacher and a huge ensemble cast of kids. There's 4 of them out and there's a 5th one coming. And I don't know what Aaron's plans are, but I hope there are going to be even more. And they're just these really great school stories where a lot of different kids can see themselves and feel seen, and they'll recognize experiences, and it just gives them a whole bunch of fun and also insightful look into a bunch of other kids' lives and their experiences in and out of school. It's just great. It's just wildly great. I hope he makes like 100 of these. Another favorite of mine recently is Mika Song. Donut Feed the Squirrels, the first one, Donut Feed the Squirrels, and then Apple of My Pie is the next one coming out in June, I think. And these are just great. And these ones, I love Mika's work for about a million reasons, but this is for even younger readers. Like I read this with my daughter, who's 3.5, my older daughter, and it's fewer panels per page. Some just complete scenes with just no words and all action. And she's got a brain for stories, so she memorizes these things so quickly. But I'll often read the text and point at the character, and she'll talk to me about the body language, and you can just see her picking up on so much stuff, and she'll know the emotions that are being expressed just because Mika is so good with, the barest, simplest lines that don't overstimulate a little kid's brain, but just really get at the heart of what's going on, and the emotion and the humor and just the arc of the story is so clear, and they're just so fun. I mean, even with 3-year-olds, you can enjoy these things, and they dive into books and to longer form stories than picture books offer, just so much more and so much more richly. And it's, increasing their attention and their ability to understand all this stuff. And it goes out and, it sort of seeps out into the real world too, with some of that learning.
My son got that one for Christmas. He loves it.
Yeah, it's fabulous. I love Mika's work so much. Yeah, I've got a couple others. This was a really interesting one. Elise Gravel is one of my favorite artists, writers, people ever. But she just started this new series called Arlo and Pips. And this is really interesting. Very simple artwork, deceptively simple. It's really great. It'll get kids feeling like they can create. But this was a really interesting blend of fiction and nonfiction. So kids will walk away learning a lot from this, in addition to loving the story. So those are just a few that I grabbed. But I mean, I could go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Jared Rossello is another one of my favorite creators. This book, Red Panda and Moon Bear, there's a second one coming out. This one just makes me feel like a kid again. It just makes me giddy with joy. It's great. Yeah, I mean, that was 4, I think. I have a stack here. I could just keep going. But those are a few most recent favorites that I, can't get out of my head, and I just want to keep reading and rereading.
Awesome. Well, I'll be sure to put links to all of those books and those creators too. So if people want to follow up with them, they can. Thank you so much. This has been such a valuable conversation, and I hope people feel like they leave it, that they have permission, right, to read as many graphic novels as they want, and that it is real reading. We don't even need the air quotes. It has so many valuable pieces for our kids. I'm going to end this with some quotes from some research here in a little bit after the conversation. But real quick, we didn't even talk about your work at all, Jarrett, but I fell in love with it at the beginning of quarantine when you were putting out so many amazing pieces of content free for kids at home, and they really inspired my kids. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your work before you go?
Sure. Yeah, I am an author illustrator, a storyteller. I often just call myself a creator. I write books that are just text. I write books that are illustrated, and I make graphic novels, and I make activity books. So for me, I feel like, we were talking about brains. I feel like my brain is equally verbally and visually balanced, and I use words and pictures in different sort of ratios depending on the story. And what I need to tell. So I sort of am all over the map when it comes to my output. But what you mentioned were some activities. A big thing that I like to do in my work is encourage kids creatively. So while I hope that kids of all kinds can enjoy my books, I really try to write for kids who maybe haven't discovered the joy and excitement and rewardingness of reading. I hope to get kids addicted to books and addicted to reading. And also, I hope that my work always doesn't just leave them impressed by what I can do, but leaves them impressed by what they are capable of. So whether it's a novel, an activity book, a graphic novel, an illustrated chapter book, I hope that my art and words and stories and the way that I share them gets kids not only eager to pick up another book, but eager to go out into the world and to, share their own stories and make their own things and to change the world for the better. So I guess that's my elevator pitch about me and my work. And you can learn all about it more specifically through the various, means online.
Yes, your website is truly a treasure trove. It has so many amazing things, and again, I'll make sure that I link that. But thank you so much for your time today. Hopefully, together, the two of us have made a convincing case for the graphic novel. And happy reading, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this work.
Just as I promised earlier, here are a few pieces of research that back up the things Jarrett and I shared in our conversation. In an article called Yes, Graphic Novels Count as Real Reading, Alex Minek shares this in Today's Parent. Graphic novels actually help students become more sophisticated readers, thanks to visual cues like the font used, which helps them communicate a character's emotion. For instance, this teaches them to pick up on a book's tone, which is a skill they're able to use with non-graphic text too. She also shared this quote from another teacher. Graphic novels are also thoroughly entertaining, which is why they appeal to kids who are voracious readers as well as those who may have a harder time with the skill. This can boost the confidence of the struggling readers when they see they're reading the same books as the bookworms. Anne from Iowa Public City Library had this to share in an article called Don't Judge a Book by Its Genre. Graphic novels are real books. What's more, the reader of a graphic novel is decoding words and pictures together at the same time, and synthesizing these information sources in their brain. This creates an even deeper and more complex reading experience than text alone. She also shares that 88% of kids say they are more likely to finish a book they've picked out themselves. Letting kids read what they want to read increases reading motivation overall. Karen McPherson of the Washington Post had this to say in an article titled, Don't be afraid to let children read graphic novels. They're real books. Are you sensing a trend? These books also offer all readers a way to practice important reading skills, such as building vocabulary, understanding a sequence of events, discerning the plot of a story, and making inferences. And comics give young readers training in visual literacy, helping them read and interpret images, an essential skill in our highly visual world. Research from the University of Oregon found that comic books average 53.5 rare or more complex words per 1,000. That's more than children's books, which average 30.9, and even adult books that average 52.7. And finally, Emily Pendergast, the director of reading education at Vanderbilt University, had this to say: "It's not what they read, but how they read, and how often they read that's going to improve their literacy. Pushing children to read things they don't want to read," she adds, "often leads them to not read at all." All right, so what do you think? Are you ready to give graphic novels a try? If you do want to, I have loads of links in the description box to help you with your next steps in graphic novel reading. I want to say thanks again to Jarrett Lerner for joining me in this conversation. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And if you have a person in your life who maybe isn't quite sold on graphic novels yet, please send them this video so that they can learn and grow and understand the amazing power of these incredible stories and this story format. I'll see you next time here again on Learning with the Word Nerd.